Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we welcome a special guest, and that's Mariano, who's the head of smart contracts at Maker. So thanks for joining us today, mate.
Happy to be here.
You're actually in Argentina, you said in the pre-interview, which is super interesting because we hear a lot about what's going on there. So maybe tell us a bit of your background, how you got into Maker, and what took you to Argentina.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born here, and I did live most of my adult life in Mexico. So I lived from 86 till 2011 in Mexico City, and then I moved back to Buenos Aires. And so I moved right around the time that Bitcoin started just getting popular in certain circles, of course, and that includes people in tech. And also 2011, late 2011 happened to be when the government instituted capital controls in Argentina. So we've always had a big entrepreneurial community, a big tech community of freelancers working for companies outside Argentina and trying to get paid in dollars. Because of our economy, getting paid in dollars is pretty much the best thing you can strive for. And since we couldn't do that, because you couldn't just receive dollars, you had to trade them back into pesos. A lot of people tried to find other ways to get paid, and first they found PayPal, and then that got shut down. So then a lot of people found Bitcoin, and so that's why we have a big community that found Bitcoin, started companies surrounding that, and then they found other things such as Ethereum. So that's one of the things where I think we have a thriving community, and that was pretty much my case. That's how I graduated from Bitcoin to Ethereum to working at Maker.
Yeah, and you said in the pre-interview that Maker actually predates Ethereum in a lot of ways. So tell us a little bit about that. And was it that stablecoin part that drives you? Is that what we're starting to see more adoption of in some of these places, more so than Bitcoin, or do you think there's an equal interest?
Okay, let me answer in parts. So, uh, I joined Maker 3 years ago, so I wasn't there for the very beginning. The very beginnings of Maker, they do predate Ethereum mainnet launch. It's started by Rune Christensen and Nikolai, who were part of the BitShares community. And BitShares had done something of stable coins or assets pegged to something else, but they weren't exactly what Maker did. Maker refined that. But the original MKR token, it got created on the BitShares blockchain. And when Ethereum mainnet came out, the founders and the small group of people that were the Maker project, they decided to reissue the token on Ethereum. I joined a few months after that, I would say. And as to the other question,
So the next question was just about the stablecoin, and is that adoption in Argentina, and what's the interest
mm,
like compared to Bitcoin?
uh, so far it is not as big as I would like. Bitcoin has a 10-year head start, right? And that's fine. And a lot of people did. Um, they made a lot of money just because they were there early, and I saw a lot of people also lose a lot of money because they got in late. So that's one of the things that, especially lately now, I see that there's renewed interest in saying, okay, the technology is good. The way that we can move money or value around without the government uh, getting their hands into our pockets, that's great. But volatility is not that great, right? So we see the small group of people trying to find something else, and we as Maker, as a Maker Foundation, also in places like Argentina, we're trying to educate more people, saying, hey, if you do like Bitcoin, then how about looking over here and going after a stable coin? And And we are finding that a lot of projects do like it, but you have to go one by one, right? It's not, I would say that market penetration is really, really small compared to something like Bitcoin
Yeah,
right
I,
now.
I, I,
That's what we want to
I
change.
imagine for the average person, yeah, it's not really a stable coin. It almost is an investment, just being able to stay stable to the US dollar compared to the local currency that continues to be hyperinflated away. So, what are your thoughts around capital controls? We've seen India announce another crackdown on withdrawals. A number of countries, I'm sure you're familiar with this. So, in those countries where we have crackdowns, do you think that the decentralized nature of DAI, it doesn't really matter how much of a ban you put on it, there's always ways for people to hold this and acquire it?
Oh, yes, totally. And uh, what I saw, the news that came out of India, it's not unlike what we saw in Argentina in 2001, I believe it was. Yeah. Uh, it was called the Corralito, and it was the exact same thing. The government put a limit on the amount of money that you could withdraw from your bank accounts. My grandparents, they died without getting access to some of the savings that they worked for their whole lives, and yet there are certain cultures that often even expect that you can ask an Argentinian and they will say, when are we not in a financial crisis? So even if you save in dollars, that is of course an investment. Somebody from the US might say, yeah, but the dollar does have 1% inflation, 2% inflation. Yeah, but here we're dealing with double digits, 50, 55%. And it's not always that easy getting, like having access to dollars. And if you have capital controls, which we did a few years ago, and now we're getting them back. So we're in an election year and things are tricky. They instituted last month maybe that you cannot buy more than 10,000 USD per month.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's piling on, that kind of thing. And people, at least here, they're used to it and they always find ways to get around it.
Yeah, you say they were used to it and that they're always in a financial crisis, but it wasn't that way for a time, was it? Argentina was quite a resource-rich country at one stage, and do you think at that time people thought, wow, all's great, we've got all this oil, our economy's going okay, we're never going to go through that hyperinflation again? Or do you think people were always worried that it was going to go wrong?
So I don't want to get too much into the politics of things because there's a lot of ways to look at them. But we were one of the wealthiest countries in the world in like the late 1800s. Some say that with the advent of socialism in the 50s that started the decline. And I tend to be one of those who agree, but you can ask another Argentinian and they'll tell you a different reason. So I don't expect to have the absolute truth. After that, it's been like crisis after crisis, hyperinflation. We did have a period in the 90s, but then again, I wasn't here. I was living in Mexico, so everything I got news from my family and friends. We did have a period of stability where actually the peso was pegged to the US dollar at a 1-1 ratio. But then it exploded, right? They couldn't maintain the peg, and people saw their savings evaporate.
That is crazy to think about, that one-to-one peg, isn't it? So let's dive in and talk about Maker. The DeFi space has exploded. We've seen DAI being incorporated in so many things. So yeah, what's your just general take on the DeFi space and DAI uptake? Is that very exciting to see it all come together finally?
Yeah, I love it. Most of the things that come out I use. So I've created CDPs. I've taken out loans. I lend DAI on DYDX, Nuo, Compound, Dharma. I've participated in Pull Together. I send DAI to other accounts using RDAI. It's I have token sets I try to at least try everything once. And there's the thing that I like is that DAI is used in almost everything. And even though you look at least the market cap of stable coins on Ethereum, and DAI is what, like 80 million total supply, and probably the next one, I don't know if it's maybe USDC with the 400 million, and then Tether, of course, it's in the billions. But if you look at market cap, that's one thing, but volume of transactions, DAI is, I don't know if it's number one or number two. So it is being used and used a lot. And not only for speculation, but for, I don't want to say like real use cases, because speculation is a real use case, but it's being used to pay salaries. It's being used to transact. It's yeah, I think that with MCD we're gonna see that more and more, because remember that single collateral DAI is kind of like our beta project, and it's what, 2 years old.
Yeah. I do want to get to multi-collateral DAI in just a second, but the question I
Yep.
wanted to ask you first was, watching all this stuff going on in DeFi, and I think it's just the first thing that we're going to see happen on Ethereum. I think we're going to see insurance and lots of different things blossom. But when we see Bitcoin maximalists, one thing I just can't grasp my head around is how you can possibly bet against all the smartest developers and all these projects on Ethereum, and you are one of those developers. So do you have any thoughts on Bitcoin maximalists saying that, you know, there's only one coin and Ethereum's not going to work, there's nothing happening on there?
I will say that there is probably not room for all the tokens that are out there and all the blockchains that are out there, but trying to say that there's only room for one, I think it's a little bit short-sighted. And I think that now that DeFi is becoming a thing, I've seen some people in the Bitcoin community saying, oh, DeFi is good if we can bring it over to Bitcoin. Before it was just like smokes and mirrors. I don't know. It's like what people say, go to where the developers are. I do have incredible confidence in this community that we're building stuff that, and a lot of people talk about maybe scalability and there's not enough transactions per second, whatever. I think those are real problems, but they're solvable problems.
Yeah.
And just the fact that stuff works right now, I mean, I think the future is bright for all of this.
I mean, I went to DevCon and I was amazed at the presentations on the different scaling and all the iterations, the separate teams working on those different scaling techniques as well. So you've had conversations with all those people, I'm sure, and a lot of the research is now complete. It's just about writing the code and freezing the specs. So are you fairly confident that Ethereum can scale?
Oh, yeah. From what I've seen, and I've been trying to be more informed in this on a day-to-day basis. I think the date January 3rd, 2020 was given for the Beacon chain. That might be too optimistic, but I am hoping that at least Q1 2020, we're going to see that. And when you look at things like those 7 projects achieving interoperability just by going into one house and staying for a week and working on that together, those things are pretty common in the Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I like to see that, and I like to see that more and more. And of course, that tells me that we're on the right path.
Is that the story I read about the 30 devs that locked themselves in a house for a week? Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's they're working on the Beacon chain, which is like phase 0 of Ethereum 2.0, and they're all working on different clients. Just as right now we have gas parity and like Ethereum and one other. It's like for Ethereum 2, there's like 7, 8 different ones. Yeah. And they weren't really talking to each other, and they just locked themselves up and made it happen. It's like by day 2, they had 2 of them working together, then 3, then 4, 5. In the end, they had all 7.
Magic. So let's talk about multi-collateral DAI. This is something that I'm very excited about, and I've done some videos, particularly for our members, about what coins that I think this is going to benefit. Recently, we've seen discussions around even including real-world assets like treasury bonds. So do you have thoughts about Do we need liquidity? Is it going to be fine to include small coins straight away? Do we want to exclude assets like securities because that's going to go against the decentralized nature? Or what assets and what do you see around MCD?
So everything that happens with multi-collateral DAI, as happened with single collateral DAI, has to go through MKR governance.
Yes.
That's the first thing. So one of the things that the Maker Foundation has been doing and will continue to do is try to get MKR as widely and diversely given as possible. So there's a lot of different people with different ideas, maybe, or having as many people as possible vote on this kind of thing, and hoping that what is voted on is sound and that the community votes on they make good decisions. So with that said, the first iteration, or when we release multi-collateral DAI, the community has voted in, it's going to be at first only ERC20 tokens, right? And of course, Ether. And at least this is personal, at least I expect that for the first months or maybe even more, it's still going to be, most of the collateral is going to be Ether.
Yeah.
Because that's the native token of the blockchain. It's the one with the most liquidity. And there is going to be a portion, hopefully, that's going to be one of the other tokens that the community voted in, which I believe it's BAT and 0x and maybe one other.
Yeah.
I would need to double check.
I should probably give a quick primer for people at home. Just, we haven't even explained. So for those that don't know, DAI is a stablecoin that's backed by Ethereum and it's over collateralized. So we always know that there's more in existence than there is DAI that is circulating. But what we want to move away from is the volatility of Ethereum going up and down. If we can back that with like DigEx's gold or other tokens that are uncorrelated, then that makes it even more stable for that basket that's backing the DAI stablecoin.
Exactly. And even single collateral DAI only being backed by ETH, it's worked really great this past 2 years. When we launched December 2017, ETH was around 800, 600, I don't remember, went up to 1400, down to 85.
Yeah.
And the peg stayed stable around $1. But yeah, the idea is to diversify that basket a little bit. And we see a lot of people pushing back against that idea. I personally want to see it happen. And bringing outside assets, this may take a long time, but it's something that's in the horizon, right? Starting to tokenize things like real estate. And of course, some of these assets, they may end up requiring some kind of KYC, right? Because if you're working with something that is a security or is a restricted asset, then you might need to do some KYC, but probably not at the maker protocol level. Probably at the I need to acquire the token level, and then you would put that token into the system and borrow against it. But there will always be the option of using tokens like Ether, that do not require any KYC, and you can borrow against that and not have to do any of it.
Yeah, I haven't given it a lot of thought, but I think I'm actually against the securities. And if we had a liquidation cascade over a weekend and we were relying on US Treasury bonds and markets were closed, I just see us running into a lot of issues, and it's actually maybe centralizing the project a bit. Would you agree with that?
So it could be. I think it would need to, MKR governance will also need to take that into account and diversify. It's like, if you would be collateralizing 50% of the supply with that amount of risk, then maybe MKR governance would not be doing their job proper. I would say at smaller amounts, and again, I'm not on the economic or risk side of things. But again, that's something that excites me. It's something that it's going to be an experiment to watch out for. And and see what happens. It's, of course, you don't want to speculate with people's value, right? So MKR governance does have the responsibility to maintain the health of the system. So maybe too much centralized or KYC assets would be a bad thing. I don't know.
Yeah, you raise a good point about the maker governance allowing to set the metrics. So even if we did use treasury bonds, we might have to make the amount of collateral you use even higher again for that asset class. Recently, I had a discussion with someone in the XRP community, and obviously they're trying to get the interbank protocol, and they're talking about liquidity pools, and you need a big liquidity pool of XRP to swap from Aussie dollars to Argentinian pesos. But what I've seen in Ethereum and DeFi, we've got that many dexes out there now where you can swap currencies, and we see projects like Synthetics producing synthetic currencies. So I kind of argued that, well, I can swap the synthetic AUD to synthetic pesos on Ethereum through a DEX, and we don't even need liquidity pool. Would you agree with that? Is there a lot that Ethereum's doing that people don't realize that's maybe just as good as other projects?
I would say so. Yeah. I think we're at the point where we're going to see a lot more come out here in, next week in Osaka, DevCon 5. I think one of the biggest strengths that we have is interoperability. There are so many projects and protocols now in Ethereum that we're arriving at the phase where so many of those are out now, and now we just have to piece them together. So money Legos, as they call them.
I love it. I love it. The DAI market cap, I read an interesting piece the other day talking about how the utility actually increases the bigger this gets. So if we only had a market cap of a couple $100,000, we'd be able to do a few cool little things. But now we're in the millions. It allows for a lot more of the lending and whatnot. And if we can get that into the billions or trillions, what it actually opens up to allow DeFi to do is just amazing. So would you agree with that? And do you think that we are going to a very big market cap as we absorb all these other assets and DeFi things?
Yeah, of course. And the debt ceiling of single collateral DAI has been kept low, mostly on purpose. When it started, it was 50 million DAI. So that's all you could ever create. And once that ceiling was reached, the MKR governance voted to raise it to 100 million. And even though we had conversations, in the governance meetings and forums, Twitter, that we should raise it again, it was actually never done. And I don't know if it'll ever happen because MCD is close. We're close to releasing it, hopefully.
Yeah.
and MCD is the one that is going to have probably a much higher debt ceiling.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. I just wanted to ask you quickly about the Moloch DAO and Ethereum funding. Do you think that's something that could be done better? And where did they get that name from? I think it's a shocking name with its... do you know its meaning in the background? I don't know why they chose that.
Yeah. So I am also part of Moloch. I joined in February, as well as 25 other people. So it was a brainchild of Amin Soleimani and Cassandra Sheep. They one of the things that Amin wanted to do with Moloch, he calls it I forget the name. But anyways, it comes out of an essay called Meditations on Moloch. Thing is, we as humans, we are not good at organizing and pooling resources. And the idea behind is that if everybody in a society sacrifices their child, and then they even forget why they do it, and somebody just comes out and said, hey, let's not sacrifice any more children, then the rest are going to pile up and say, no, how can you do that? And it's hard to communicate when you're in a big enough group, and it's hard to coordinate, and it's hard to pool resources. And just like the name is a play on something that is hard to do, that Moloch intends to solve. It's like we're trying to kill Moloch, and also calling it the Moloch DAO. It's like a mimetic filter, I would say. It raised over, like, I think 8,000 ETH. Most of it came from Vitalik and Joe Lubin and Ethereum Foundation consensus. But we've been giving out grants regularly, and Moloch is funding a lot of cool projects. And the good thing is that it doesn't take all that long to go from here's an idea, somebody champions it, and in 2 weeks maybe they can receive a nice amount of cash to continue.
Yeah. So what are some of your favorite projects or just areas that people are working on Ethereum?
I really like Aztec Protocol. I think they're one of the best. Trying to get more privacy into everything we're doing right now. Everything is pretty much public on the blockchain. They did have a prototype for like a zero knowledge DAI.
Cool. I did a tutorial the other day on Tornado Cash, and it looks like they're going to include DAI next as well.
Yeah. I know both Romans from Tornado Cash. They actually gave us a workshop 2 weeks ago. We at Maker, the smart contracts team, we have a cryptography group session every 2 weeks, and they came and they gave us a workshop on the smart contracts and the technology behind it. And right now, the mixer only supports ETH, but they're adding DAI. Once they add DAI, they're adding ERC20s in general, right?
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Any other cool projects or partnerships, things that you see in the future roadmap that really excite
you? There's something that's kind of boring, but that we need more of, which are on and off ramps. I would like to see more of those because that would lower the costs. I have one of my benefits is that I get paid in DAI, so I don't need to on ramp. People have asked me, so how do you buy crypto? And my story is that I've never bought crypto in my life. I started getting paid in Bitcoin, then in ETH, then in DAI. So I've only ever had to off ramp into pesos to pay rent and everything. So I would like to see more of that, and then of course just see more in products and protocols integrating together. When I see stuff like Dex.ag or 1inch Exchange, when you mentioned liquidity, now I can go in and say, okay, I want to sell some DAI or I want to buy some ETH or another token. And with 2 clicks, I can get the best price because I'm sourcing 70% from one DEX and 25 from another and 5 from another, that kind of thing. But yeah, personally, the one that I would like to see the most is more streaming payments. I want to see people get paid in DAI, but receive DAI by the second, and then be able to do stuff with that. Either put it in something that pays interest, or move it somewhere, or have something that say, hey, if the price of ETH drops to this much, then grab 20% of my paycheck and buy. That kind of interoperability. And we're already seeing stuff like that. It's still not quite there yet.
Yeah, when we have negative interest rates around the world, I think within the next 12 months, we're going to see apps on the phone that are like a high interest savings account where, maybe we don't keep the 10% rate, but even if it goes down to 5% and people can keep money and earn interest, it's going to be amazing.
Totally. I don't think the current interest rates are sustainable.
Yeah.
Maker, it's down to 10.5% now after being, I think the top was like 20%. Yeah. But even a 5% is, I would say, a very good rate.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Mariano. I've really enjoyed it. Is there any final thoughts for people at home?
Sorry, what was that?
Any final thought?
Any final thought? Oh, well, just that anybody that's in Ethereum, I want to say that we're probably still in the beginnings of this industry, and if you're watching this, then it's still early, and try to help out any way you can. I love to talk to developers, but I also love to talk to people who just are enthusiastic on Twitter, and like anybody can contribute to any project. It's like I love this community.
Yeah, that's why I just can't believe that some people hate the Ethereum community. But anyway, that's a story for another day. So thanks so much for joining us today, mate.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, guys.